When I got into this, I thought I had to be the bearer of all the good ideas. Turns out I need to support good ideas. I need to figure out where momentum is going and support it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Blah, Blah, Blah Something Wellness podcast. We are talking about what makes a great leader. We have a couple familiar faces and we have a new special guest. I'm always excited for the new guests. I love my team, but I like new too. So I am your host, Tami Sharp, my partner in all things, Chris Zamora. We have Greg Nottingham with us, and I'll have you do a quick intro in a second. And then we have Kim with us today, and I'm going to have her introduce herself in just a moment. Greg, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Tammy. Greg Nottingham. I'm a retired sergeant from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office here in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Spent 30 years with MCSO and spent about 15, 16 years as a sergeant, frontline supervisor, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And Kim, will you please tell us about yourself?
Well, I go back a little further than that. I am currently the sheriff in Doña County, which, if you don't know, we are on the southern border or the southern end of New Mexico, the border of Mexico and Texas. And I've had kind of a circuitous route. I started in California law enforcement in 1980. I hate to date myself, but people are usually adding the numbers up anyway. And it's been a heck of a ride. I was there nearly 20 years. I retired and did government contract work for anybody who would ask. I started with OPM doing backgrounds for top secret clearances. My final days, about 18 years later, I was doing Medicare fraud, which I said I would never do in a million years, and I actually loved it. I can't go to a doctor ever again, but I loved it. And then a few years ago in 2018, I was living here in New Mexico in Las Cruces. And turns out that to be a sheriff in my state, you just have to be 18 and live in the jurisdiction in which you vote. And gosh, I was over 18 and I had voted in this jurisdiction. And I ran and was reelected twice. I term out at the end of this year. We can only do 2 consecutive 4-year terms.
I have so much. I'm so stoked that you're here. First of all, thank you for being here. Because one, you've literally been in law enforcement longer than I have been alive to age myself.
I know.
uh, but you're also a woman and you have been in law enforcement for that long. So you have seen a lot. You've been through a lot. You are so sweet and you're so fun to talk to. But I also would not mess with you because I know you are tough. You have to. So will you kind of share how it was for you in the beginning of your law enforcement journey?
Someone asked me about that just a day or two ago, and I had to laugh because they asked how I happened to enter law enforcement. And I honestly don't know. I'm actually trying to recreate that childhood picture that got me here because women were not in my field. I came into law enforcement in Southern California through being a paid call fireman for California Division of Forestry. I lived in a rural area. CDF would hire women. And one night I was out on a car fire. None of my equipment fit me. While trying to put out a car fire, I fell down, and a very nice highway patrolman came up to me and said, there are easier ways to make a living. And from that moment on, I started pursuing law enforcement. And I've been the first woman in 3 agencies. So it goes back to the fact that we didn't have role models at that point of what you could do. and where you could go and where you could be. So I kind of ended up in that role myself a little bit. I was also the first woman detective in Santa Barbara County where I was not assigned to juveniles or sex crimes. That was new. So all of these little steps along the way have informed a lot. I'm the first woman sheriff of my county. I am only the second woman to be elected in my state as sheriff. So we've had a long history. You might have heard of us, Sheriff Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. That's our fame. So you know we have a long history, and it was a step out for voters, and quite resoundingly to bring me to office twice. And then I'm not from here, which is, I didn't come with the Spaniards crossing the Rio Grande. So therefore, I'm a stranger still to them. And they were very open about change and wanting change.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. I have so much. I feel. I know I was like, oh, we'll have the whole team. I was like, well, I could just talk and ask all the questions. I'll let you. Do you guys have anything you want to chime in or any questions? Because I have a million questions.
No,
I
not
want to know
really.
more about Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid.
Chris, we don't make light of that here. I'm doing it here because this is a podcast to show everywhere else, because their descendants are still alive here today.
Oh,
And you have to be very careful about making broad generalizations. Okay, Pat Garrett did not ambush him in the back, in case you're talking to Billy's ancestors, right? So there are rules to this, and that's
oh,
all I'm saying. I'm kind of constrained by age old culture here.
that is fascinating.
Really
That
cool.
is, yeah, yeah, it is really cool. I want to come visit.
Yes, please. I've got a few more months, so we'll show you around. I can actually take you to the sheriff's gravesite up here. So
Oh man, that would be cool.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're if you see me like under the computer, I'm like booking a flight. Uh, no, I love it. And so, okay, this topic is what makes a great leader. So, in the beginning of your career, one of the things that we've talked about in other episodes is what makes a great leader is not always the most positive ones. Sometimes it's the really bad ones. So, did you have, and you were a woman when there were no other women. So, I know that you did not have an easy road. So, did you have like, what was your leadership like? Did you have good and bad? All of that question.
well, we all have, right? We all have had those, and
Yeah.
I've had the gamut from the most salty, most unlikely colleagues, unlikely allies you could ever imagine. And most of them came from the street. They were not upper management. They were the cop's cop. If you want to, we all know those people. They were the people that said she can do it. She knows how to do it. And without them, I would never have even gotten a voice. Let's be real. They were the ones that gave me credibility, that gave me support in a difficult time. I then had the opposite, where I was actually told to please stay away from a certain lieutenant because he's a Vietnam War veteran and he doesn't like you and he's unpredictable. I have actually had both sides of that amazing coin. But I think going back early on, I saw good leadership in the field. That's where I saw good leadership. I saw people making brilliant decisions in a snap of fingers.
Mm.
So, what advice would you give to today's, well, oh, everybody, the younger generation, the women in law enforcement? We now have, there are a lot of female leaders. I know that some women that I talk to, they're still in departments that they're surrounded by people that don't think women should be in law enforcement at all. Um, Fortunately, our team does not think that way. Both of these guys have worked with women that they're like, absolutely would love to. I would rather have them backing me up than some of the guys. So it's a kind of a controversial topic. But for you, what kind of guidance would you give? I guess I'm rounding this question around. I got so many floating, but to the women specific in law enforcement, what kind of guidance would you give them?
I First of all, you're not going to be liked. And I say that now, men can somehow internalize that better, I think, than a lot of us. I think we tend to take a lot of this very, very personal, and I think you are not going to be liked if you stand up. You are not. If you speak out and you defend either your department or try to be the one in charge, in my case, the sheriff, you're not going to make a lot of people happy. And I think that's something I do think women, to include myself, we need to really get hold of, because it sounds easy to say, "Oh, don't let that bother you. Don't let these critics bother you. Don't let the politicians who ignore you bother you." Well, the truth of the matter is, it is bothersome. It's very personal, and politics is especially cruel in a lot of ways, I believe. So you're it's double edged, right? And I think the thing I would tell them is to find your point on the horizon and try to find the path to the horizon, but realize it will not be linear. It will not be a straight line. And you're going to have all these things in between. So your challenge is, how many of these things do I want to jump over? How many hurdles do I want to go over? What's my commitment level? And where I think for women, it's kind of important that we pan that out or try to see that on the horizon clearly for ourselves. You could probably say that's true for men as well. But I think because women often were juggling home and family, and I have children, and there is a lot going on. Not that men don't, but I think it helps us to kind of stay focused. And I think sometimes we need that focus.
And I think where it relates to the men too, especially one of the things that we've talked about, it's universal, is if you're doing the right thing and you're standing in integrity and you're following and you are calling out toxic behaviors or culture or whatever that is, you definitely aren't going to be liked. You are not going to be popular, but doing the right thing, male or female, I think that's probably where, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, where the men would probably feel that the most similar to what women feel in law enforcement, in my humble, ignorant opinion.
Well, I mean, Kim, your career spans almost 50 years. What what's the main difference that you've seen, a change or a shift in law enforcement from the early 80s to today?
Well, the biggest one is uh, discrimination and second class citizenship for women leaders and women in law enforcement still exists. It's just much more nuanced, and it's much more, uh, I think, cleverly presented. And we still sense it, whether we recognize it right away or not. It comes to me, it'll come in where there's kind of over explaining to me about what well, here it is. No, I'm asking you for right now, right here, to give me a short synopsis, not to go into the entire history of how we came to today. So it goes to that over explaining, like you don't know. Instead of saying, in my case, that uh, you don't have the experience, Sheriff, it's yours was so long ago. You see, yours was so long ago, it couldn't possibly count. Now, I don't know too many men where they would say that to very many men. If you've done it, you've done it, whether it was 5 years ago or 50, you've done it. And that's that nuance of uh, m- treatment that is very noticeable to some of us, but is a little more, I guess they're trying for political correctness, perhaps. But
Hmm.
it's better, but it's not as good as it should be.
So
Still some work that needs to be done, right?
there's some,
Yeah.
Yes.
and from what I've heard, the majority, so Greg and Chris, when you guys were in your prime, did you ever have pants that didn't fit you right or a uniform that didn't fit you right?
And when I was in my prime, I'm still in my prime. What are you talking about?
Oh,
I was
touche.
actually complaining the other day that none of my clothes fit. So
Way to
I think I think for the most part, yeah, the uniforms fit. When we were in our prime, right out of the academy, everything fit right, and stayed that way for quite a while.
my point with this, with women in law enforcement that I've heard. So you can worry about your political correctness and have your, look at us, we have women, da da da. But they're still struggling to find uniforms and pants that actually fit a woman's cut. To find anything, and that's one of the biggest complaints that I've heard from women in law enforcement is, can we at least have a uniform that fits us?
Yes. Even body armor. I came from a place where it was made to really fit a woman's body, and I came to this location here not 7 years ago, and they're still wearing male vests. Do we not know they don't exist, folks? And I even had said to our procurement people, yes, they actually have these. They were amazed. They were amazed. So I think it also depends, Chris, on where you are. Where are we in the country? So it's hard to make that blanket statement that things have changed and they're wonderful. In some places, they are much better. Probably where we are more numbers. I only have about 20 women out of 170. That's not equity, and maybe one day when we're more visible equally, there will be more of that acceptance.
So
Well,
when your deputies go and they test for hiring, do you have two standards, one for male, one for female, or is it just one standard?
It's just one standard. Yeah.
Okay.
And we I will tell you, I thought this is kind of funny. Back in the day, we all had to live up to this very incredibly hard standard in terms. Now we make it real easy for the men too, because guess what, folks? They're not in shape either. So now we have the physical fitness, the last part, so that they have weeks to get ready for the fitness. And I will tell you, that's not for the women. I was amazed when they told me, "Sheriff, we have to turn this van around here because oh, some of our men are failing out." So, or they're not getting through the application. So, no, we don't. That is a concession we made, but it was to general fitness of this era.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the things with women so there are absolutely men and women, I guess. There are people that think that women should not be in law enforcement. And there are certain people on the TikToks and whatnot that are very vocal about that. And then I would push back that the women that I know personally, it's the same standard, so they have to actually sometimes work even harder because they have to hit the physical standards that a man can do. They got to do that, but there's so much other stuff that they need to have that resilience, and they sometimes really do have to work harder. So if they've made it that far, they've earned that. It's not being handed to them. They've actually earned that. I know so many incredibly just physically fit, strong, amazing women that absolutely belong in this. Now, I have my personal opinion. I think women, if you're going to be in, it's just smarter if you have martial arts training and you know how to fight. That's one thing where it's like, and that's for men and women. I have that opinion. For you, when you were, coming up through, gosh, like, were there any other women? Did you see another woman ever?
Well, in my academy class, out of 72, there were 7 of us.
Okay.
So, and we went to different departments, in Southern California. So, yes, I did. I did think it was funny. My colleague, who I know to this day, was number 1 out of 72 in academics and physical fitness, and they made her 2 to make 1 feel better. So, that you see, that's the kind of thing even then you would see this kinda game playing. But, I laugh about physical fitness because, rarely do we have to maintain a level of fitness after we get on the job. It's to get to the job, and then all of a sudden, nobody seems to really be worried about anybody's fitness, and some of that is unions and pushback. I get that, but I always thought that was the funniest thing that, we would be so concerned for 5 or 6 months and then never give it another thought, you know? And by the way, folks, some of this was just I cannot tell you the number of times I drove my car up across a lawn to a fence, got on the hood, and went over the fence. Many times, many. So yeah, let's use some brains here, right? You know, we weren't. It wasn't the Olympics we were trying out for. So no, I didn't see a lot of women for the first probably 10 years actually, until I moved apartments and again sometimes all of this too about the physicalness was about confronting people, right? Or fighting people. I have had a few knockdown dragouts, but by and large, I just sympathized with whatever their issue was and got them talked into the car. Well, why would anybody want to go down to the ground with anybody?
Right.
And so some of it, I think, is just smart policing, don't you all?
Oh, I agree 100%. Is muscle usually, I mean, for the most part, it's not what you need sometimes, because I've had really large male officers arrive on scene, but they can't communicate for anything, and they end up, pissing off the person, right? And then same token, I can have a female officer show up, show some empathy, talk like a human being to this person, calm them down, and it's an easy day for us, right? So, yeah, common sense is you don't have to fight everybody. Muscle isn't the answer to everything.
Well, yeah, and we all get old, right? Hopefully. And believe me, I remember a woman that we were fighting, or I came upon a scene, and that our male was having a tremendous time with this woman, and she was upset with her ex-husband, and he'd left her, and they had no kids. And I said, "Yeah, those guys, they're damned. I had the same damn thing happen to me. How is it with your? How are you dealing with your kids?" Well, before you know it, she's in the back seat of the car telling me her entire life story, but guess what? We didn't lay a hand on her. And then the male officer says to me when the door closes, he says, "I didn't realize you were a single mother with 3 kids." And I said, "I'm not a single mother with 3 kids. What the hell?" So be the part, be the role. I don't really care as long as we get there safely and for all of us. I've known males who have been injured for and out of their job forever over stupid things.
Yeah.
Let's be real. Stupid.
Well, I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
I know that I spent, my 30 years, I've had my share of knockdown dragouts, and those are the ones that you just couldn't communicate with.
Yes.
Those are the ones you couldn't talk to. There was no getting around it. And trust me, I mean, if I gotta go, I gotta go, but I don't wanna have to fight everybody. I don't wanna have to fight anybody. And so I got really good with the verbal judo and just, talking them into this is what we're gonna do and finding that little bit of empathy that that shows that, you care a little bit, but you're still gonna do your job.
Yes. Yes.
well, and the
Yep.
key, smart policing, and I kinda chuckled when you said that, because one of the things, like, my algorithm on all of the social medias, because of what I do, I get nothing but body cam footage all day, every day, and so I sit there and I watch way too much of it, and I'm like, "That was dumb. That was dumb. That was bad training. Dumb call." Like, a lot of officers, I don't think they understand how to break somebody's pattern of thought. Everybody gets looped into it so much, and they just keep doing the same thing until all of a sudden now you're hands on. Where if you would have taken, so not that I'm comparing, but I'm just saying what I used to do. So I owned a bar and as a bartender, and I was my own bouncer, and I would break up fights all the time because I would do something stupid in a, like, make you think like, "Hey, there's a purple elephant over there. What's that?" And you redirect their energy for a second and get them out of the loop, so then you can then come in with the talking them through. And, like,
Yes.
yes, there are some people that you are not gonna get through to, but that's not everybody. And a lot of the stuff that's going on the body cam, it's just like, "Oh, okay. Okay. It's one of the reasons we're here."
I think that so much of this, I even did that with let's be real. I know nobody's gonna hear this part. You can cut it out. But back in the day, we didn't do really cool things always. We did some very heavy-handed things that were very inappropriate. And I look back on some of that and shudder. I worked with a lot of Vietnam veterans coming out of Vietnam. They were short fused to say the least. So one way I would get my male colleagues off of someone after I felt they should be off of them, because I told you they were very protective of me in the field in a good way. They were very not protective, but they were very amenable to me being present and being part of their team. And so what I would do is tap them on the shoulder and say, we don't have much longer on for code 7. And if you don't get off this guy, we're going to miss code 7. Oh, mid sap. Remember saps? Any of you?
Yep.
Right? Mid saps would stop. They would get up, dust themselves. But it's exactly what you're saying, Tami. You're breaking that. What's going on up there? You're just turning the table a little bit.
Well, and when it's funny, Kim, because you talk about a sap. I don't my generation, I don't remember saps, but I know what you're talking about. And I was just at the gym today, and there's a retired LA County deputy. Um, and he was working out, and he and I are talking, and he's much older than I am. But today he talked about a sap, using a sap from back in the day. So I know what you're talking about.
See, I've had to explain at my department and not to everyone. Great. I didn't explain to everyone what a SAP was. I just said, well, it's kind of long and it's that, but that the uniforms had SAP pockets, right?
Yeah.
A lot, and nobody knew. Younger generation they kept their flashlight in there. Remember that, Greg?
Yeah.
It was like, oh no, that's for a SAP. So when I started, it was actually illegal in California where I started. But the older guys, they still carried them and they still used them, and they're pretty awesome, horrible things. I'm glad we don't use them, but I think it took a while for that whole era to kind of fade. It wasn't just because it was outlawed.
Mm. Well, the culture changes, tactics change, right? And, at that time, that was acceptable. And, even in my, in my generation, dropping F-bombs and locking somebody's keys in the trunk of their car after you arrested for DUI, like, that was acceptable back in the day. Today, you're not gonna get away with that. You're gonna get written up, and you're probably gonna get in trouble for that, right? So, again, it's the evolution. You have to evolve with this profession.
Yes, it's about it every 20 years, and that makes sense, right? Because most of us retire out at 20 to 25 years, and so you'll get the new change. And don't get me wrong, I think in a lot of ways we've made tremendous adjustments, and especially for a population like ours, which is really resentful and almost stubborn about change, in my humble opinion. And so the fact they've been pulled kicking and screaming anywhere close to 2026 is really admirable.
Yeah.
Well, we're stubborn in law enforcement, and at the beginning of my career, we didn't have the in-car MDCs, right? Little computers, right? We didn't have that, and then about midway, we ended up getting them, and I'm like, "Nope, I'm not taking that. I'm not gonna do that. I don't need a computer," right? I was one of those guys, you know?
Right.
And, and I had to, because I would take the oldest car that didn't have it, that was the very last one, to get a computer, and then finally, they put one in there, and I had to use it. And then once I learned the mapping system and, you take your calls, I'm like, "Hey, this is actually pretty convenient." It actually helps. But again,
Well,
the stubbornness,
the
right?
stubbornness.
Stubborn.
We're doing that right now. We're in a new transition with AI where there's the early adopters that are like, okay, we're going to use this. It's going to be the way of the future. And then there's those that are still trying to learn how to use a laptop,
Yeah.
present company included.
Talking about me?
Yes, I am.
Talking to me? Yeah, I agree.
No, okay. So I love this conversation. It's so fun. So that is also one of my questions. You came up where okay, were you always kind of a natural leader or
Yes, I wasn't referred to as a natural leader. I was referred to other things as far worse. But yes, I was not known to go along, and I was not known to not ask why, which is in our world, tantamount to death. You just do it. You don't ask why. And so I was always outspoken. I mean, I've sued twice for discrimination. So, well, hostile work environment discrimination. So, no, early on, I realized that, you know, somewhere you just it's a boundary, isn't it? You just have to draw a boundary and say, I'm not going to put up with X. And so, because I was willing, oddly, from somewhere, DNA perhaps, to draw those boundaries, I was really, um, they would just, the chiefs and sheriffs would just go, oh, that's Stewart, you know. It was almost like it was but on the other hand, I was compelling, other of my colleagues to think more, I think, creatively and then tackle some of our problems as lower rank that we could actually solve and impact. So I think it was, it kind of backfired on the chiefs and sheriffs, didn't it? They were like, "Oh, she's fine, she's not doing any harm." Well, I really wasn't, hopefully, but I was introducing my colleagues to, especially when I got into detectives, about different ways to think about solving crime and how we could, deviate from the normal checkbox and still be within the law and be within policy.
And that's the thing where women's brains, we naturally look at things differently, where departments need to lean into that. There's jokes all over, about how if you can't solve a crime, put a bunch of housewives on it. We will figure that stuff out. Like, we know how to find people, we know how to figure out,
Right.
give us a basic description. Like, if in the dating world, when you're single, oh, you can
Yeah.
find so much information out on somebody if you need to. So put the women in, let them be detectives. Bring out, I mean, honestly, here's my little, like, joke, half joking, but if you created, like, a civilian wives cold case club, they'll figure some of that stuff out. We think this
Well,
way.
I recently watched, it's been on a while in the back years, The Closer, and, that, was a very, part of it was who was the producer was Gil Garcetti, was the former DA of Los Angeles County. So they were very great stories, I thought, but The Closer was typical of that, mix it up, solve something from the end of it to backwards, and, I think in her interviewing was, just how she portrayed interviews was spot on, because we can be anything that we want in an interview as long as it's, you're within the law and the policy. I think that's harder for men. I really do. I really do. I would go in with my male partner and we would see who the suspect responded to. And this is probably routinely done, but if they liked him better, I left. And if they liked me better, he left. And we got that down very, very well. But again, it was kind of using not only our gender, but it was kind of using some creativity. What makes you, uh, what makes people respond to you?
Well, I mean, Chris, you did that when you were a detective too. You would have your female counterparts do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah, one of my best mentors was, Debbie in homicide, and she was such a great, she trained me, great interviewer, and she and I would sit in an interview together, and exactly what you just said, Kim, we'd see how the suspect would respond to both of us, and we didn't have to say a word to each other, we would just read body language, and then we automatically knew, who's gonna do the interview and how it's gonna be done, and many times Debbie's like, "Hey, Chris, I want you to call this person up, this and do an interview with her. She won't talk to me, but I know she'll talk with you." And I'm like, "Debbie, I don't know anything about the case." She goes, "You don't need to. Here's the thing. I'm just gonna brief you on it. I just need you to do that." And we actually drove to, I think it was Prescott or somewhere here in Arizona to go do an interview. And she goes, "All right, Chris, go and meet her. I'm gonna wait for you right here." Right. I'm like, "Debbie, I don't know this is gonna work." I went and I interviewed this lady, and she told me everything. And and I brought her back. Debbie's got a big smile on her face. She goes, I knew you would get it, right?" Because we were just so connected, uh, you know, just the 2 of us. And, again, it's that connection, right? That with your partner and being able to read the room and read each other, and you gotta put your ego in check because even though you might be the primary detective on it, you're not getting anywhere in the interview. That's when that's when your partner comes in and takes it home for you, right? So yeah, and that's Debbie unexpectedly passed away in surgery, and I was out at an outdoor scene, and she sent a text to everybody that, hey, I'm going to have a quick surgery, not a big deal. I'll text you guys when I'm done. And then a few hours later, our sergeant called us and said that she'd passed away in surgery unexpectedly, right? And so that really, I didn't recognize it at the time, not until I started teaching years later about wellness. But that kind of put me in this tailspin of what I call meltdown, because it dealt with loss, right? Loss of somebody in somebody important to me, which was Debbie. Now, with that being said, what do you do for yourself to keep yourself balanced so you don't go into that meltdown phase, that because you're going to see a lot of things, and you've probably seen a lot of things throughout your career. What kept you balanced? Because you have that gold that all these young officers, all these young detectives want to know. What kept you here? Like, what do you do for yourself?
Oh, well, that that's interesting, and before I get to that, I wanted to comment too that one thing I've noticed about being in leadership is not all of our ranks and jobs prepare us to be the top leader. I used to think, well, if you got to sergeant, lieutenant, captain, whatever, deputy chief, you were what they wanted. And as I've gotten into this work, I've really realized not everybody is cut out to go all the way to the top. They could be leaders in their own sphere, and I think, Chris, you mentioned it, to put the ego in check. And that is a real challenge. And it's not because it's a bad thing. We're picked for having let's face it, we fit a psychological profile, and that profile works in a certain arena in our work, but it doesn't always work all the way up. And I've noted that probably stunningly in my own uh, time here that some of these people, I don't want them to be the chief or the sheriff. Not because they're not great people or wonderful personalities, but some of these calls they really couldn't make. When the rubber met the
Right.
road, they never really had to hit the road, did they? I mean, we know those people. They've done this little jog to the top, and so I'm kind of off your topic, but I think you bring up a very good point because it's not always training at the bottom for the top. And what do I do? I've had my own challenges, and I won't go into them other than to say I was off duty riding my motorcycle one day, and a man with a gun tried to kill me. And, that was a big deal. It was about 5.5, 6 years ago. 5, I think. And, long story short, I had to go on my own journey, parallel to what was going on there, because as you mentioned, that brought back flooding of things I hadn't thought about for years, decades. And so, I will tell you, it was right during COVID. And guess what was really big during COVID? Telehealth. And,
Wow.
I saw it to this day, I have, help through telehealth. And it was really important too because I'm a bigger fish in a very little fishbowl. So it would have been really hard for me to keep my personal life personal, locally. So it's odd how I think that worked out tremendously well. But I also realized probably maybe as you allude to, Chris, that um, I wasn't going to be able to go on. That was a triggering event that unless I did something, I would be worthless at home. I would be worthless at work. I would be worthless.
Well, and that's a great point that you brought up. The self-awareness of it, right? You're not going to be able to continue this unless you do something about it, right? And I think, and I always say this: police, fire, we're the best problem solvers on the planet. The problem with us is we don't recognize we have a problem, right? And this is why we'll operate this way in years. So you had the self-awareness, which is great. Now, I wish every cop could have the same self-awareness to get help, which is what you did, right? You went, you got
Yes.
help, and that helped create that balance for you. So no, I applaud you for that, for recognizing it and then putting your ego in check and saying, "I need help. I need to reach out to somebody," because that's the biggest part too, the ego.
Yeah, I often hear, the therapists that run these wellness programs say exactly that, "Yeah, I can convince you, sheriff, but I can't convince I can convince you that your people need it, but not you." And, I get that to some extent. For me, it wasn't so much about some kind of brave face. It was that it was immediately apparent to me that this wasn't gonna be good. So, and it was very interesting here because there was a little bit on the news. It never really made a lot of news. It ended quickly. To this day, no one on the department has ever said one word to me about it. Not one word. Not my command, nobody. And I find that almost more telling about them, don't you? Than because I always think, wait a minute, that was a pretty big deal. It was a car chase. It wasn't just a little one. He tried to commandeer 5 cars. We had a fight. I tried to get him from stealing a truck. He tried to steal an ambulance. This was a big event for a little place, right? And I think it's very interesting. They were afraid to talk to me at the time. I was a witness, obviously. It was my deputy killed him, drove up and killed him, rightfully. It's justifiable. But isn't it interesting? To this day, not one person ever said one word to me about it. And maybe it's because I don't bring it up, but I do think it's sort of like that mirroring, don't you? They're a little afraid to say something to me because what might I say to them? Who knows, right?
Well, and the thing is, we're great at talking to people and helping people solve their problem, but we are horrible at talking to each other, right? We don't know how to talk to each other, and I think maybe possibly that is why I don't know what to say, to you, and if emotions start to come out, I don't know how I'm gonna deal with it, right? With a coworker or with my boss, right? We don't know how to do that. I
Yes, you're so right. I had one time where I cried at work, one time, and I won't go into this too long, but it was a tragic event, and it was talk about officer wellness, and it was all over the news. My colleague, former colleague in Ventura, California, he went to a bar. He had been retired. He went to a bar in a place called Cook's Corner in Orange County. He walked in. He shot his wife several times. He shot 4 bystanders and, 15 he wounded 15 in this bar. He got into a big gunfight out in the parking lot, with Orange County Sheriff, and they killed him. And I was noticed by my alumni, my veterans, that, John Snowling, that's his name, had, done this horrible thing. And I remember crying because I had just been told, and my major walks in and I swear to God, you could have, uh, he looked like he was going to faint. He did not say anything. He did not touch me. It was like, "Oh my God, what do I do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I've heard this very upsetting news," because it truly was. He was truly a victim of having no wellness, no help, right? And, I digress, but, you bring that up so well that we have no idea. And after that, I thought, never cry at work again, because that makes people really, really nervous.
Mhm. Yeah, right, and you're on point, you're on topic, with that situation because you're right, right? If you didn't know how to deal with it, I'm a very I love '80s pop culture, right? And you remember the movie Rambo back in the early '80s, right, with Sylvester Stallone? I watched it as a kid, loved it. What kid did not love Rambo, right? Especially with the survival knife and what have you. But I watched it not too long ago after a 20 plus year career in law enforcement. I watched it and it was completely different this time around. In the movie, and watch it again. In the movie, Colonel Troutman, who trained Rambo, when he comes and talks to the small town sheriff, he's bragging about Rambo, about he's his career in Vietnam and all this, and he's talking like a proud dad. Okay. At the very end of the movie, Troutman is trying to talk Rambo out to give himself up, right? It's a very end movie. And then what does Rambo do? Rambo starts to cry, and he starts to talk about all the trauma that he experienced in Vietnam, all the people, his friends that he lost. He started crying, and they did an excellent job. Watch this movie because I cannot express how excellent they portrayed this. Troutman looks at him. He didn't have that proud papa face that he had earlier in the movie. He had a almost a disgusting look on his face, and it's very you can barely see it, but you can see it. And then what does Rambo do? He reaches out and he tries to hug Colonel Troutman, and Troutman has no idea what to do. His face is the most uncomfortable face, and he barely puts his hand on Rambo's, shoulder. Like, he has no idea what to do, and I'm like, "Oh my god, that right there, that is law enforcement." We don't know what to do when somebody cries, somebody reaches out, somebody wants a hug, somebody wants connection. We don't know how to do that. Tactically, we're on point. We know how to deal with tactics, right? We know how to deal with chaos, but we don't know how to talk to each other. We don't know how to connect with each other. Watch that movie again, and you're gonna see it. You're gonna see in different light. It's just and here's the thing about that movie too. I'm sorry. I'm Sylvester Stallone, if you're listening, I'm really talking up your movie because it is awesome. After that scene with Troutman, here comes Rambo walking out. He's escorting Rambo out handcuffed, and Rambo's wearing Troutman's coat. And again, holy crap, that scene right there, that coat scene. You see, an inanimate object gave more warmth to this man than a human being could. That's what that message was at the very end, and it blew my mind. Well, I'm sorry, I'm an '80s pop culture kinda guy, but when I watched it, I'm gonna watch it again because it's such a great movie. The very end, you're gonna see it, and it'll be completely different now when you watch it. Sorry. I went on a tangent there.
Well, it does, and I think it all speaks to leadership ultimately, doesn't it? It all speaks to some of these people, not because they're bad people, they're not cut out to be the leaders. One of my challenges is judging my leadership ability through my um, disappointments and failures. Okay, that I don't know. I will tell you, my therapist says that's not the right way to look at it. Okay. But I do look at it through rather than where did we succeed? I look at where did we miss the mark and why did we miss the mark? And some of that is about simple things. When I got into this, I thought I had to be the bearer of all the good ideas. Turns out I need to support good ideas. I need to figure out where momentum is going and support it. Because when they're my ideas, they're not always accepted, are they? Because somebody at the top is telling you what to do. So that's something going back to leadership, just living and learning from my ground up experience, so to speak. That I remember those. I remember that myself. Oh, the chief wants that. We're not doing that. What's the ulterior motive there? You know, and then I get into this position, and what happened to all those great conversations that I used to know by heart, right? You know that great. Well, if it's forced on you, uh, no, let it be your idea. But I think as leaders, we have to be able enough, and our ego is checked enough that we recognize when someone has a good idea or a path that we need to support it and to give it legs.
Well, support it, but also give credit where credit is due,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So many sadly, so many leaders try to take credit for everything, and it's like, well, no, this great idea came from this person right here. Give them credit, right? Because that is what creates motivation. That is what creates positivity, right? And yeah, it's okay not to know everything, even if you are the chief or the sheriff.
Well, and I think it's very important to emphasize, the crying it used to be seen as weakness, and for some guys it's, still weakness. Women, we cry by nature. It's and we know how to purge and get it out because you feel so much better when you do that. And I think guys need to kind of learn how to let themselves have that emotion because it releases so much, and it is not at all a sign of weakness. It is actually strength to be able to do that and purge that. Because if you don't allow the emotions to come out, they're going to that energy has to go somewhere. And that's where you get tumors and cancer and all of this stuff that's stuck in your body because it's literally stuck energy. And the other thing I wanted to say too, with nobody checking in on you with that, I think that's also a mark of a leader because the strong leaders that everybody looks to that are strong, that have it together, that do all of that. I mean, also with the rank and the position, there might be some intimidation. They're not sure how or if they can approach. But just when you're in that leadership position, this team here, we all coach and talk to and help other people all the time. I constantly am checking in on other people, whether it's friends or clients or whoever. I am very good about one, also trusting if somebody's name flashes in my mind, I'm like, "Oh, I need to see how they're just how you doing?" And I check in with people all the time. That favor is not returned. And so I've had to sit with that. I do not have very many people checking in, and I do have these two. Well, Chris gets it all the time, whether he wants to or not. I have Greg as the fallback where I'm like, Chris doesn't want to hear me, you get to. Uh, but I mean, I've trained some of the team that to check in on me from time to time. But outside of that, I think people just assume you know what you're doing, you have it together. And they don't realize that when you're in one of those positions, I might not share it with you, but just knowing that you did try to check in, that's appreciative. And I think speaking as a leader for other leaders, just check in on somebody, just show that little, hey, you good. It goes a lot longer, even if you don't get a whole conversation out of it. It's it's a mental note, if that makes sense. I mean, how would it have made you feel if one person would have been like, "Are you good?"
Yeah, well, and I do think it came from, publicly, I'm having to maintain some kind of demeanor, uh, and then, the news is shoving things in my face, and there was so much going on. So I think you're right, though, that, looking at it from the outside, it was probably, well, she's fine, I also took a lot of hits. I wasn't armed. I should have killed him, how dare I didn't. Well, yeah, I mean, my excuse is pretty bad. I was riding my motorcycle on a Sunday morning and I don't carry my gun. Shame on me. Because when I fall down and get knocked off, somebody's going to take it. So I don't do it. So, but I took a lot of heat off that, you're not fit to be the sheriff. Again, we go back to Pat and Billy. It all circles back to Pat and Billy.
Hmm. I want to learn more about Pat and Billy now.
I know, seriously, Chris and I are gonna be like, "Okay, let's go hang out." Um, Greg, you've been quiet on this one. You're Hi, do you have anything
I
you wanna chime in on?
well, I've worked with a lot of women in law enforcement. When I started in '85, we had a chief deputy that was uh, a female, and as far as I know, she was very liked and very respected. I don't know what her internal struggles were over the years or as she went up through the ranks to get to where she was, but she seemed to be pretty well respected and was a good cop. And I've worked with some female deputies that should not have been in law enforcement. But then again, I've worked with a lot of male deputies that should not be in law enforcement. And I think the ones that can find that middle ground and I don't care for male or female, can you do the job? And are you um, able to control the situation and have that command presence and um, get somebody in the back of the car handcuffed without having to fight them? And it never bothered me to work with a female. As a matter of fact, most of the female deputies I worked with were good cops. They were smart. They had that instinct, and they were good cops. So I got a list of male cops that I would not work with ever again, and they shouldn't have been there. But um, I respect anybody in law enforcement that can do the job.
Greg, I'm sorry, but I've got to say, you know what we did. I mean, I longer than you, but if they were a worthless cop, in my case, they were men, not just because, but they were men. If they were applying to be the sergeant, we go, "Oh my God, you should be the sergeant. You'd be excellent," right? Because what are we doing? We're promoting them to where they're no longer a threat.
Yep.
So we were like, "Oh yeah, do it. You would be great." And you knew right then those were people you'd be scared to death to be out with, right? That's what we did. So the joke for a long time was if you rose for the first 20 years, if you rose in the ranks, you were probably fairly worthless on the streets. We got them out of our hair.
Oh my gosh. This is so okay, so planting the seeds. Sometime in the fall, winter, we are gonna do an entire month dedicated to women in law enforcement and unpack some of the good and the bad and all of the different things that come up with that. Because I think some of the conversations need to be had. Some education needs to hit some more ears. um, get through some egos. And then this was a great episode. I would talk all day. It's so fun. I do appreciate and love that you've had this long, full career and you've gone through this, trauma and all of these things, but you're using telehealth, you're doing these different things to take care of your mental health, but what is your to just get through it and not be disgruntled? Like, what is your little secret? Because there are a lot of people that have done far less than you and they're just miserable.
I'm stubborn. That's really it. I didn't leave on a note I wanted to leave on. And when there was a little more to my running, but basically I could see the path because they were far behind where I came from. You knew they were like a 1980s place and I tell them today, I brought you to 2010. The next one's gonna have to bring you further because we really aren't there yet. But,
Wow.
basically, I'm just stubborn, and I wasn't going to let the sheriff I ran against, I knew he was corrupt through some areas, and I thought, you are not going to walk in that door again. There is no way. And as my therapist would often tell me, those aren't the best reasons for your decision, but more power to you. But mine are not a real, I wish I could say this Pollyanna positive. It really isn't that. I will not be pushed down. I simply will not be.
See, so my own curiosity, what's your zodiac sign?
A Scorpio. I
I
am
I was like, you're
really
either
a
a
Scorpio.
Scorpio or a Leo, so
I know. People either love me or hate me. There
I
is
love it.
no middle.
I love it so much. Awesome. Well, I want to honor everybody's time. Thank you so much for being here. This was absolutely just an awesome conversation. In true fashion, if somebody were to just tune in to this last little piece, what is all of your guys' 2-second mic drop takeaway piece of advice that you have for the old school and the youngins out on the street? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go.
Yeah.
So just as a leader, as even from a sergeant on up, just take care of your people. Um, be honest, earn their respect, and take care of your people, and they'll respect you, and they'll go anywhere in the world for you if they respect you. So just earn that respect.
And Kim, we'll let you go last and give you the last word since you're the guest, right? So,
Chris.
uh, for my two, I don't know. I guess what I would say is evolve. You have in law enforcement, there's an evolution. And if you don't evolve with the times, you're going to get left behind, right? So, what are you doing today to evolve so you can stay up to date with your agency? Or what is your agency doing? Start with you, the individual, though. All right.
Well, I'm at my desk, so it's easy. It's on my desk. This is it. Listen broadly, absorb honestly, decide carefully, and own your decisions.
I love that. And my last thing, I want to echo what Greg was saying. So take care of your people. If it doesn't have to, well, one, pizza parties, they don't want pizza parties. We've heard that firsthand. They don't want pizza parties. Stop it. What they do want is access to wellness resources. They want you to know, they want to feel seen and heard. And so going back to what we were talking about, the check-in, and you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to have solutions. You don't have to fix anything. Don't be weird if they cry, but just check in every once in a while. How's the family? And don't say, how are you doing? Because all you're going to get is good, and move on with the conversation. If you really want to do that, hey, what did you do this last weekend? How's Timmy in soccer? Whatever that is. Like, ask an actual question that's going to get a response and conversation. That goes miles beyond something that you would ever actually really realize makes an impact for that person. So, on that note, thank you guys all for being here. And for the audience tuning in, please watch the whole episode, like, subscribe, do all the things. And until next week.